Hey you, have you ever wondered why you keep matching with those average looking Pokemon on Tinder? Well, I haven't really either, but we're gonna take a look at it in this live coding session, so that means I'm not gonna edit out the mistakes, so you can see how I go about fixing errors, and I think that's very beneficial to you. We are gonna create an app together that lets you A, cast a vote on a Pokemon, so either the left or the right one, whichever you find more handsome, and then create a list from those Pokemon so you can choose your ideal next, Pokemon match for your next date. Let's just dive right into the project and see how it's done. Okay, so here we are in the application, and let me quickly introduce you to what I've built so far so you can get a little bit of context. So what I've built is a Pokemon beauty contest. In case you've ever wondered which Pokemon is the most handsome or which is, the opposite, let's just call it. You can vote on this website. Well, you can't vote yet, but that's the objective. So the user will be able to navigate to this website and either click one Pokemon or the other that get fetched at request time. So when I reload the page, you can see the Pokemon also change. Now, how do we get the Pokemon? Well, we have a request. We are making to an API called the, let me make that a little bit larger for you, to the Poke API, which is a free online API you can call to get Pokemon. And then we are returning that Pokemon to the front end, which is right here, rendering two of them out side by side so the user can vote. Now, we want to add the voting functionality because right now when I click these Pokemon, nothing happens. I've already created a database for that. Let me show you that. The database we'll be working with is a SQL database. Let me go to this account. I called it Poke-like, and I've already showed you how to connect to a database, which you can see in my T3 stack for beginner video. So this is nothing new to you. And yeah, we've created the database. Now we want to add each vote we can cast on the front end right here. We can close that to the database to actually get a list, if we want, of the most handsome Pokemon. And then at the bottom, the worst Pokemon. And how do we go about that? So let's go over the modeling. So each Pokemon has a vote's property. And now we want, when the user clicks one of these Pokemon, we want to create that Pokemon if it doesn't exist. And if it exists, then we want to increment the number of votes it has. So this value right here by 1. Right, so what we need at first is a custom mutation because we're making not a GET request, so we're not using query, but we're making a post or a patch request in that case. So let's call that vote as the first parameter. We're gonna pass what we expect from the front end, so whatever data we expect. And that is going to be a ZOT object, which is just going to be an ID. We don't need any vote property. So let's leave it at that. And then we have the resolve function, which is going to handle all the logic behind this Pokemon vote. Okay, so let's remove the GitHub Copilot suggestion. Now, there is, as far as I know, a Prisma property we can use for this. That is called, first we need to receive the Prisma, which is in the context. So if you go to the context file, you can see the Prisma is right here, which is nothing different than a new Prisma client we've initialized that logs out a couple of things. So, okay, we can receive that Prisma client as the context. And if we look into it, we can go to Prisma. And I haven't pushed these changes yet, so we need to do that first. So let's go npx prisma db push. So what I'm doing right now is I'm pushing the changes I've made from the standard, standard Prisma schema into the database. So this right here gets pushed into the database, so the database knows, okay, there is some model called Pokemon and it has these two specific properties. Now that I've pushed that into the database, we want to restart the Typescript server. So our files also know what's up and they're up to date. And now if we go to context.prisma, we can type .pokemon, and now we want to update it or create a Pokemon if there is none. So there should be a Prisma property for that, right? Like update. Well, I think let's try it out. I think the standard Prisma update will also create the Pokemon for us. So we want the ID, that is going to be the input ID, and as the data we're going to pass, it's going to be an object, and we're going to have the votes, increment them by 1. So one thing I love about working with tRPC, TypeScript and Prisma is that in this case GitHub Copilot, but if you don't have GitHub Copilot, you can also see it as the Pokemon type knows which properties the Pokemon has, and therefore if you want to change a value that doesn't exist, like instead of votes, which does exist right here, let's say it had like upvotes, which doesn't exist, then in that case it would throw an error, which is very much in our interest as a developer. So this property right here, you can see it's suggested, so we know it exists. We're going to increment that by 1. Now the ID is giving us an error, and that is because the ID here is expected as a number, but we have defined it as a string right here. So let's remove that, and the default is going to be the auto increment, and I think that should work. Now, no, that doesn't. Okay, that doesn't work because we need to do again what I just did, which is npx prisma db push those changes we just made in the schema.prisma to the database, which we need to do every time we make changes in this file. It's done pushing them, so we're gonna restart the TypeScript server. Hold on a second, and then the error should be gone. Nice, it is. Now this doesn't work, we don't need that. That is just the standard API route we get in the T3 stack. We don't need to worry about that. Okay, now let's try it out. We have the where ID is input.id. So that means whenever we call this router right here, the vote router from the front end, then we also need to pass an ID. Okay, this is where we get the Pokemon to list. So now handle Pokemon voting. Let's do that. Okay, so the constant we can destructure from tRPC, we'll worry about that later, is equal to tRPC.useMutation, because we have a mutation right here. If that was a query, like the first one, for example, then we would use tRPC.useQuery. We're gonna pass that a string array, press Control and spacebar in VS Code to see what TypeScript will suggest you, and that is every router that exists if you did everything correct. And I really like that about tRPC, as I've mentioned in the previous videos. So Pokemon.vote, which is our mutation we've defined right here. Now, what can we destructure from that? We can destructure the mutate function and call it something like vote. And now whenever we call that vote, it will expect whatever we have put right here in the input. Okay, so whenever someone clicks a Pokemon, whether it is the 0 or first, then we want the vote to happen. Let's create a function for that first, which I think will make things a bit easier. Let's do it right here. Voting function. Let's just be a bit verbose about it. And we're gonna call it handle vote, but we're not gonna have those properties. Instead, we are expecting an ID as a number. And then that will be this number. Okay, we're expecting an ID as a number. And now we're gonna handle the vote, which is, we're gonna call the vote function we've defined right here. Now, if we just call that, it's going to give us an error. And why is it going to give us an error? Because it expected multiple arguments. Now, if we insert an object and press Control spacebar, you can see what exactly it expects, everything we've defined in the input, in the mutation, the ID that we pass as the number. Now, this handle vote is never being called, so we still need to do that. And let's take a look at the front end. So whenever we click the blue square, then we want to vote for the first Pokemon. And if we click the red square, then we want to vote for the red one. So the blue one is defined right here. So let's just change that to a button just for HTML, clarity purposes. It's going to be type of button. And on click, what should happen is a function being called, and that is the handle vote for the ID of whatever Pokemon we clicked, right? So how do we get the ID of the Pokemon that was just clicked? And what is the ID? So the ID is not a random string generated by us, but whenever we request this data from the API, the Poke API, let me show you the type of it, then we get an ID back. That is not a random ID, but it is a number from like 1 to 500 approximately that corresponds to a Pokemon in their database. So we don't want to use a random string, but the ID they give us, which is saved right here in the Pokemon list once we load the page. So when we click the first Pokemon, then we want to go to the Pokemon list at the first index, which is the 0, Pokemon list 0, and then we want the ID of that. Now, okay, this can be undefined. So what we can do is add the Pokemon list 0 .id as a requirement up here, and that still doesn't fix the error because this could be undefined, but it can't, right? Okay, object is possibly undefined, Pokemon list at 0. Why is that? Because if we remove that, then this wouldn't be undefined, right? The name is a string. Okay. Let's just keep the ID there for now. And I know this is a bit of bad practice, but I'm just going to insert a, what is it called on English? Like the exclamation point, right? The exclamation point right there. Let's just leave it there for now. If this was a serious production project, you would probably not want that. But for now, I'm just going to leave it there. And then the same thing will happen when we click the other Pokemon. So that would be this one right here. The button of type button. You can just paste the on click from above, and that would be the Pokemon list at the first index, the ID that we want. Okay, now we, instead of going straight to the database, let's just console log the input.id out here, call it mutation with ID, and then list the input ID. So technically what should happen right now when we press the first one is, I pressed it, so now in the console logs it should log out the click, but it doesn't. And what also confuses me is that the hover does not indicate that these are a button, and I'm not quite sure why. So let's restart the server, take a look at that, reload the page, and now they still do not indicate that. Why are they not doing that? Let's see. Close that. This is a button. So, okay, hold up. Let's just log out the clicked. So whenever we click the, okay, I probably know why it happened. It is very likely because of the exclamation point. But let's just log out clicked. And now in the browser console, we should see, let's delete that. Which one was it? No, we still don't get the clicked message. Why is that? Oh, okay, hold up. That is because we have, yeah, okay. So we have an OR separator right here, this thing in the middle, And that one is positioned absolutely. And you know, when I add a background of red 500, what I suppose is exactly, okay, so it covers the whole thing. Now that is a problem because whenever we click the button, it thinks that we're clicking the absolute element because it is positioned above the other stuff. So to fix that, we can add a pointer events none to it, and that will prevent that from happening. Now we can, have the on click the console log, and now we can also click the stuff. Okay, perfect, that works. So we can replace this again, vote for the Pokemon at the first index, nice. And now in the browser, not in the browser console, but in the terminal, we should see whatever we log out in the backend, because this is server-side code, so it's going to be logged out right here, and not in the browser, and that should be mutation with ID, and whatever the IDs of what we click is. So let's click this one. I'm not sure if it's more handsome, but let's just leave that up for interpretation. And mutation with ID 217, perfect. So that means the Pokemon in our database with the ID of 217 should receive one upvote, so one increment. Now let's see if this works as is, because I'm not sure if the update will actually create a property or a model in our database, in this case a Pokemon that doesn't exist yet. And to check if it does, we can go to npx Prisma Studio, which will create like a live view of our database. This is in Chrome. I want it in Firefox though. As we can see right now, Pokemon is empty, so there are no Pokemon. And if we refresh this page right here, then we can either click this one or this one. I think this one looks cooler, so let's click that one. And now we can go to our database, reload it, and there are no rows in this table. Okay, so invalid Prisma, an operation failed because it depends on records that were required but not found. Okay, so this pretty much means we're trying to update something that doesn't exist. So that's unfortunate, it won't do that. Let's see if there's something similar. Okay, so there is something called Upsert, which might be the thing we are looking for. Let's change the update to Upsert, which is gonna throw an error though. Okay, let's Google Prisma create or update. Let's see if there's something for it. CRUD. Okay, so I didn't find anything useful there, but I found this GitHub post right here, which is fairly recent. And these people suggest that we can use the Upsert, but not with the data we have defined here. So let's remove that. And they have the where, which is going to be the same, where input ID is equal to the ID. But then we have, okay, so then we have the update. Nice, and we want to update the votes, increment by 1. And it is throwing one big error though. Property create is missing a type. Okay, so create. Okay, so we also need to define what to create if it doesn't exist yet. It's the create object, and then we can have the ID with input.id, insert a comma here. And now the errors are gone. Okay, let's save that. Go back to the front end, reload the page. Okay, and now, which one is more handsome? I think this one is better, so let's vote for this one. Click it and go to our database. Reload the page and hopefully there's gonna be a new Pokemon. And there is. Okay, so the ID is 481 and it has 0 votes. Now that shouldn't have 0 votes but 1 vote since we clicked it. And the reason for that is we have defined votes as a default integer 0 here. Now, there would be 2 ways to change that, to have this vote right here show 1 whenever we vote. The first one, which I think is the, not worse, but more hard to maintain choice, would be inserting a 1 here. But I think what would make more sense is create this Pokemon with a votes of 1. Because then we have all the logic in one place instead of splitting it up inside multiple files, which would make it harder to maintain. Okay, so we have the router. Now we can reload the page, vote for a Pokemon called, this fish. I mean, no offense to the fish, but I think this gecko looks a bit cooler. So let's vote for the gecko. And now let's reload this page. And really nice, we see the 252, which is the gecko, right? So we can copy that, go to the Poke API. And now if we take a look at whatever this ID is, submit, it's the Trico. So the one we've just voted for. Nice. Now what would happen if we clicked again? Because we haven't implemented any, like cookie authentication or the change of Pokemon whenever we click. We could just, spam this. So I just clicked it again. Now if we reload this, it should show 2 votes, and it does. Okay, great. Now I'm gonna leave, cookie authentication and all that jazz up to you. Like whenever you click something, then the Pokemon change, for example. But I do want to, work out one more feature with you. That is a small list of the most beautiful Pokemon. And for that, we're gonna go to the pages and go to a page called most. Actually, let's call it most handsome.tsx. It's gonna be a functional component. Most handsome. Now, okay, this is just gonna be a very simple list of the most handsome Pokemon. And for that, we want to go, to get the Pokemon to show, we want to have a query, get leaderboard, get most handsome, we'll call it, have an object, and the resolve function is gonna be a prisma dot, well, we don't really want to find the first, but we want to find many, right? And we want to order them by votes in a descending manner. And this is still giving us an error because there is one, what do you call this one? Like parentheses? I think it's called one, like a round brace missing. Now we have the router, that is a query. So to call that from the front end, we go to the most handsome list of most handsome Pokemon. And then inside, actually, let's put that in an H1, list of most handsome Pokemon. And then we want to, get the list first so we can display it, which would be tRPC dot tRPC, import that dot use query. Then what are we going to query for? Pass it a string array, control spacebar to see what options we have. In this case, that would be the get most handsome. And we're gonna have that as a data called, let's just call it Pokemon. It doesn't really matter that they're the most handsome, but what matters more is that the type of them, which is gonna be a Pokemon array. If you're wondering what is a Pokemon array in this point, that is whatever we have defined as a Pokemon inside of Prisma, because the types do transfer, so we have access to the type right here. And that means we can just, that's actually a good suggestion. Can have a UL, an unordered list, break that here, and inside of that list, we can just map through the Pokemon and have a name for each of them. Now, the name doesn't exist. Let's just have the, let's have the ID. Now the problem is that in the database, we're only saving the ID and the votes. We don't have the name of the Pokemon or an image. So what we should do is have an API call made for each of them with the ID to the Poke API, right? That is not right. So what happened at this point is I went off on a really big tangent and basically tried for every item of the list to make one API call, which is not the way to go. That would take forever and quite honestly be a spam to the API. So the correct way that I figured out after like 10 or 20 minutes was to just store the data in the database, like the image URL and the name of the Pokemon. Makes things much easier. I don't think that tangent would be worth your time, so that's why I'm editing it out, but leaving in the many mistakes because I think fixing them is worth your time. Okay, so let's continue on with the right solution. Okay, you know what? Never mind. I think the easiest solution would be to do none of this, but instead to actually save the data we want, so the name and the image in our database. I think that will just be the easiest solution. We wouldn't have to make a lot of API calls here, so we can skip all of that. Instead, we want the image URL in our model, which is going to be a string. And we also want the name as a string. And whenever we vote for a Pokemon, we can upsert that as well. So when we create it, actually, we need to push that to the database first. So, oops, yes, we do. Clear the screen and push that up. So npx prisma db push. So we're pushing the changes we have just made into the database. We can delete all the data in the database. We don't really care about that. And then restart the Typescript server. And now whenever the Typescript server is restarted, we can see the create is throwing an error because it also requires an image URL, which we're gonna take from the input, which is gonna be string. And it's also gonna take the name. So it's going to be input.imageURL and the name is going to be input.name. And now we have everything we need. The updating stays the same because we're just updating the votes. Now, whenever we call the votes though, from right here, we also should pass what should we pass? The image URL and the name. So let's have image URL and name, which are gonna get passed as image URL string and name also a string. Now the handle vote will throw an error because we should pass more stuff. So the image URL and the name. Now the image URL is sprites.frontDefault. That's what the image URL is called. And the same thing will go right here. So we're going to have the sprites front default and the Pokemon list name. The sprites front default is something that we didn't make up somewhere in the schema, but something that is coming straight from the Poke API we're using, because that's what they call it, like sprite, and then here we have front default somewhere. Okay, so that's what we have. We're saving that in our database, and whenever we want the most handsome Pokemon, we can delete all of that. It's gonna make our stuff so much easier. We can just get the most handsome. So run that query, remove all of that. We don't need it anymore. Get most handsome. We're gonna take like the 5 most handsome, order by votes descending, and that is it. So that's way more simple. We can get rid of this query. Instead, we're just gonna keep the get most handsome query. We don't need all of that. We can destructure the data we get from this query. Oops, why is it not letting me? Oh, okay, never mind. My keyboard was set to English. I'm used to the German one. Okay, so we can destructure the data from tRPC.useQuery, and that data is called like Pokémon. We can remove the onSuccess, and therefore we can remove the second object to pass. Okay, so now we have the Pokemon. These Pokemon are going to be the top 5 handsome Pokemon, and we can just render them out like this. So for each we're going to have the p.name show up. Okay, we can get rid of the unused imports. We don't have any here. And let's see, so, and now reload the page. Okay, so we get a list of most handsome Pokemon, but we don't get the Pokemon. Maybe we need to save it. No. Okay, So what's the problem here? We have the Pokemon tRPC use query. Let's log out the Pokemon and see what they look like. Pokemon. Okay. Go back, console log them, and let's see what happens. We get an empty array. Okay, so Pokemon.getMostHandsome is this one right here. We are finding many, we're taking 5. Okay, so this query right here returns 0 Pokemon. Okay, and that is because we've removed the entire database. Wow, who could have thought? Remember when we pushed to Prisma, it asked us if we want to delete all the database because it added these 2 new properties. Right here, we said yes, so that is why there are no Pokemon. That's why there's an empty array. So in this case, let's go. This one is more handsome. Reload the page. This one is cooler. Now, this one looks nicer. And now we should have 3 new Pokemon inside of our database. Let's check if that is the case. We can go here, npx Prisma Studio, see if there are 3 new ones in our database. So localhost 3333. No, it will be 5555. That's what it is. And now we have 3 more Pokemon. Nice. Just to simulate a real use case, we can get rid of all of that. We don't need that. Go to localhost. Let's click this one like 4 times. Refresh, and that should be in our database with 4 clicks, with 4 votes, should I say. Very nice. And now on the most handsome, we can remove the console log. We are just mapping over every Pokemon, and then we will see the most handsome, right? So most handsome. Nice. Okay, so the list of most handsome Pokemon, we have this one, Grotle, and Luxray. The ones from the database. Now, are they in the right order? The Polito edge should be at the top, and it is. Great. Now the last step would be to also show the corresponding image. So how do we do that? Let's just have an like h4 that contains the Pokemon name, and then we want a div, because we're NextJS, we're not gonna have the regular image, but a div that is relative with a height of 12, width of 12, and has the NextJS image component inside of it. Gonna close that off. The source is gonna be p.imageURL. Layout is going to be equal to fill. The alt is gonna be just Pokemon, whatever. And then object fit is gonna be cover. Now, does that look okay? Well, we want it to show inside of the same row. So let's add a flex item center gap 2. And now, as you can see up here, we have a list of the most handsome Pokemon, with Politoed being the first, Gigazoon the second, Grotle the third, and then Luxray being, technically according to this list it would be the least handsome, but since 3 of them have 1 vote, I guess they're considered equal. And that is pretty much it. So now on this website we have the possibility to vote for Pokemon. So for example, if a lot of people clicked Swablu, remember this has no authentication, so I can click as often as I want. And now if you go to the most handsome to see the list, you can see, because I clicked a bunch of times, to be specific, I clicked 9 times, Swablu is at the top, and thereby this one is the most handsome Pokemon. And that is pretty much the basics of tRPC data flow, interacting with a database inside of tRPC, how to do it with routers, queries, mutations, how all that stuff works. And how to use those methods from the front end to achieve whatever you want and to apply it to your own projects. I really hope you found this tutorial or coding together useful. I really hope you can apply it to your own projects and have fun with it. Just play around a bit, because tRPC makes working full stack really enjoyable. And thank you for watching the video. Have a great day, and bye bye.